Hi, this is Jason Wydrow, and today I'm going to give you a very quick, brief tutorial on getting your CakePHP application launched on a shared hosting server. Okay, so my application is completely done. I just finished building my website. Everything is tested and working on my local server. One thing I'm not going to cover in this is updating your database on the shared server. That would be a different tutorial. But most of you already would know how to do that. So the first thing, what we're actually looking at is the default Cake directory structure. I downloaded a fresh version of CakePHP 1.3, and this is the actual directory structure. And I'm going to make a few adjustments, and you'll see why. But the first thing to note, and it's very important, is that this is your Cake core folder, and this folder 99.999% of the time should never be altered in any way, shape, or form. This is basically the brain behind your application, and everything, any modifications that you do, anything you can think of that you want to tweak or adjust or change in any way is 99% of the time going to be available in your app folder, which is actually where your website files are stored, including your controllers, your models, your views, layouts, etc., etc. So that's just an important, kind of a side note, but it basically is, it's just a rule you should really get used to following if you're working in that MVC environment. Okay, so anyway, this is the Cake, again, this is the CakePHP 1.3 default directory structure. I've got my application running and my website running on my local server. It's working perfect. And now I just need to get this site live on a shared hosting server. So what am I going to do? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is really straightforward. I'm going to do two main steps here, and this is the simplicity of it. And I'm going to note right now that there are a lot of different ways of doing this. There are different reasons why some developers do it differently than this, and I have done it differently in the past for security reasons and so forth. And there's different settings, and there's, of course, as you know, as a developer, if there's one way to do it, there's probably 100 other ways you can do it that are arguably just as good. But what I'm going to show you is just to get you off your feet so you can actually get your site up and running on the shared host. Okay, so let's go into your application folder. And again, remember that your site is done, up and running on your local server, and you're ready to go live to the shared host. So I'm assuming that in this tutorial. In the app folder, there's a directory called webroot. Now, this webroot directory is extremely important because it contains your CSS, your images, your JavaScript, and other files you might have, including a standard htaccess file, and some other files that, and particularly this index.php file, which we're going to go over momentarily. But basically, what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually just copy this entire directory structure, and I'm going to go back to my main folder here, and I'm going to just paste this, and I'm going to replace everything that's in there. So now what you're looking at is, basically exactly what I did was take my webroot files and I moved them directly into this main directory. Now we're going to assume that this is your public HTML directory on your remote server. So for most of you who work on a shared hosting environment, public HTML is typically the directory name for a shared Linux server. Some companies call it by the domain name. For example, domainname.com, that would be comparable to your public HTML directory. So let's just assume these files are going directly into your public HTML directory, which is your basic website files working directory. Okay, so that out of the way. So now we just copied these files over here. Now we can upload these to the server just as they are, but you would think that something else needs to be configured for this to work, and you're exactly right. Basically, as I mentioned before, that index.php file, now you'll note that we overwrote the index.php file that was in that root directory before. And the default cake installed is an index.php file, which points to your web root and we're just basically overriding that, and it's not necessary for what we're doing here. So basically, I did overwrite that file, and I did overwrite the htaccess file. So I'm going to open this index.php file because this is really the only other step that we need to take here to get this up and running. Okay, now what you're looking at here is a configuration file that allows you to tell when basically when someone resolves your domain name. This is your index.php file, so this file is instantly recognized, and it's registered in CakePHP, and these routes, I'm not going to use the word routes here, but these directory paths that you put in this file are going to be used immediately to locate your Cake core and your actual website app file with all your website files in it. So that's actually obviously very important for the application to know where to find everything so it can actually run properly. What I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to open up a different file that I've already filled out, so that I'm not going to walk. I'm going to walk through each one, but I'm not going to walk through typing it all out right now. So hold on one second here. Okay, so I've got this file open. This is the same exact file, but this specific file has the configuration details in it. And it's important to note that I only need to make 2 updates in this entire file, which is I'm actually going to remove. I added some extra notes in here, so if your file looks a little bit different, it's only because I commented out some things, and I made a few adjustments, but nothing that I won't go over here very quickly. I'm just going to delete this actually to eliminate any possible confusion here. Okay, so what you're looking at here is your app directory and your Cake core include path. Again, remember I briefly went over. This is your Cake core, and this is your app file. These are the 2 main directories that we're going to be creating a path to. So this is all I had to do in this file. If you look after the 3rd parenthesis, I added our directory separator, public HTML, then the app folder name, another directory separator. And it's important you use this naming conventions. So always make sure you stick to a convention on when developing in Cake. But again, remember I was talking about public HTML directory. That was a directory that we're actually working in on your shared web host. Now again, this could be your domain name, .com, whatever your shared hosting company calls this directory is what you need to put in this specific element here. Okay, but note that it's pointing to your application directory. So you've got a directory separator. Again, I'm going to go back to public HTML here, and then your app directory. So this is basically just telling the shared host server when it resolves where the application directory is. The only other setting that you'll need to change in this file is right here under the core Cake core include path. Now again, this is all going to be dependent on your actual shared hosting server setup, what your home path is. Most shared hosts go by a username, so you know, so whatever you know, whatever your site username is, or the directory structure and path, and this is something that you can get from your web host. You can ask them, what can you give me the absolute path? That's really what it's called, is an absolute path to my public HTML directory, so, or your main development directory. So again, these could be different on your computer. The important thing to know is understanding just that this is your basically root absolute directory to your website files. And again, now you're looking at public HTML. And again, remember that the CakePHP folder is going to be in that public HTML directory. So this file is saved. Now this is your index.php file. This is the file that is right here. again, remember I got this file from the web root directory with the CSS, the images, the JavaScript, etc. And basically, what I'm going to do is just upload this file just as it is now directly through my FTP client or this application, and my site will be up and running. Now, if you have database configurations that are required and things like that, obviously you're going to want to get those set up or it's not going to work properly. But your basic Cake core and your application will be running properly given that these parameters are correct for your shared hosting server. And given that you have not altered your Cake core and you have not altered anything in your app files that would cause any type of reroute or some other issue on that. So remember, never alter your Cake core files, and your app folder is only for your web development and web, like I said, your controllers, models, views, layouts, and various other tools that are used, elements, components, things like that. So, and your web root directory was copied directly in here. Now, I can take all of this and upload it directly to my shared host. Everything is, again, given that my configuration paths are correct here on lines 55 and 46, my site's going to be up and running. And again, don't forget to configure your database to ensure that your site, if it does run on a database, that it's up and running properly on the actual web server. Anyway, go ahead and post your questions, comments. I'd be glad to give you some advice on if you're having trouble with getting your shared host, your Cake set up on a shared host. So anyway, I hope this was useful to some degree. Again, post your questions, comments, and thanks for watching.